along to policy changes, Article 1.
Okay, this fits almost together. It'll fit seamlessly in with our policy changes. As you know, we have been working with Perry Law Firm on updating our entire policy manual, or manuals, because there is more than one if you print them out. In trying to create a seamless update, we've come to the conclusion the best way to handle this is to present the policies to you one article at a time. So we're going to do that. We're going to present them to you one article at a time. So like tonight, you're looking at Article 1 that will be in front of you, and there's a table of contents that explains the policies or outlines the policies in there. We'll be submitting them for you to read, that article, and then all the recommended changes by legal counsel, or all the old policies that are more of a local flavor that we kept will all be in there. And so we'll provide those policies tonight for you to read, review, and process, and then we'll continue to provide you with a new article at each committee of the whole meeting after that. After all the articles are in front of you, and we've had a chance to work our way through them and talk about them, then we'll ask you for a single vote to rescind all the previous policies and adopt the new policies as presented and discussed as we've worked our way through that process with Perry Law. So that's kind of our plan. Tonight really is the first night that you'll be getting a full article of policies, and we'll ask that you, before the September meeting, take some time to read and review those, and then any questions that you might have we can cover at that time period. And we'll continue to do that month after month with the rest of the articles. I think there's 9 of them in the policy manual. So those are, the table of contents is before you, and the rest of the policies will come your way.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Next is the KSB nationwide lawsuit update with Mr. Alexander.
All right, we were notified on July 28th, 2020, that there has been a class action lawsuit filed in the United States District Court of the Southern District of New York, where all Nebraska schools, and frankly all schools in the United States, are being sued. This class action lawsuit comes about from a company that is suing on the basis of the COVID closure last spring, and details in there about special education delivery and so forth. So basically, we will be issuing a litigation hold memorandum, which just means that we are obligated to hold every article of special education instruction and special education disbursement that took place last year during the COVID closure, and that will go out to all board members, will go out to all staff members, will go out to everyone in the district that has anything to do with the district, in order to preserve the documents in their original form. So if we are called upon to produce that information, we have it. But before we submitted that litigation hold memorandum, I wanted to update you on why you would be getting it. We'll be working with staff in the coming weeks to explain to them what it is as well before they get it. So I wanted to tell you in person, because that's just a little bit of when you see a lawsuit come your way, you're not quite sure what that means. But it literally is, in the memorandum itself, it lists every school in the state of Nebraska. For some reason, some were left off. Don't ask me why, I don't know. But we are on there, as we would be so fortunate to be, along with about 230 other schools. So, and then, again, a lot of the schools across the nation are also involved in that. So, don't know what will come of it, but we'll keep you informed.
Thank you.
Yep.
Now, Mr. Alexander, talk to us about classified employees' pay during remote learning.
Yes. So one of the things that we've been working on closely with Jackie Bornemeyer and our legal counsel, and also with other schools, is trying to find out exactly the process in which schools are going about paying their employees this year in the event that we go into a COVID closure like we did last year. We don't, of course, not having very clear of a crystal ball with this whole thing, how it's going to work. We don't know if that COVID closure will be 2 weeks like it is proposed to be with Lincoln Elementary at this time, or if it will be longer like it was last spring. So what we're doing on the advice of our attorneys and trying to come up with a plan that's a win-win situation for our classified hourly employees is we're having them sign what is called a work agreement. And basically what this work agreement does, it does try to create a win-win situation, and most schools are doing this, by the way, in which the agreement basically outlines an agreement between the staff member and the district in which the staff agrees to be paid for 50% of their regular salary. So up front, if they are, if we go into a COVID closure situation, they will be paid 50% of their regular salary up front. The understanding is that with the agreement for them to return to work, we will provide 50% of their salary for hours worked beyond that. So we'll pay them 50%, but in order for them to get the other 50%, they have to sign the return to work agreement agreeing that they'll come back to us, and then we do everything we can to find the extra 50% salary that they missed out on in form of other work requirements or other duties. An example of this would be a paraeducator or a library resource helper, paraeducator, that if we go into COVID closure, their work is generated by working with students. So when the students aren't in the building, there's not a lot for them to do. But we know those employees are very valuable to us and we don't want to lose them. So through the work agreement, they agree to get 50% of their salary up front, and then in return, the other 50% can be recouped by them coming back to work, which could result in one of two things, and we're not quite sure what could happen. But we will try and find work for them, or in the event that the school year gets extended into June or July, which we don't anticipate that happening, but that could be dictated to us through the Commissioner of Education to meet hourly requirements, that 50% then would be made up during that time. So it creates a win-win situation. It protects the district, but it also protects that employee by guaranteeing them half of their salary, and the other half will be made up either at a time where we can find work for them, or at a time that the school year will get extended, and we're not getting stuck budgetarily paying a double salary, if that makes sense, if the school year will get extended. So legally, this makes a great deal of sense from a legal perspective. It creates a contractual agreement between us and that employee if we go into an extended closure, and it also allows them to recoup the 50% of their salary that's missed out on during that time period, but they still are getting paid 50% to make their, hopefully, at least make a financial commitment to their obligations that they have on them. So that's what the work agreement is all about. I would entertain or answer any questions if there are any.
So what happens if, maybe I missed it in your explanation, what happens if school closes and it's just done and they never get called back?
They will get 50% of their salary, and then what we will do within our, that's a great question. What we will do within our means is try and find work for them to do, whether that's custodial work or we try and come up with other duties in their buildings.
Well, what if you don't have any work for them?
Then they can file for unemployment.
Okay.
Any questions?
Any other questions? QC Puff refinance with Mr. Alexander.
Okay, these next three topics, item 7, item 8, and item 9, the budget preview, all kind of flow together. So I'm going to explain them and walk you through them and what the thought process is, but it all comes to kind of a conclusion as we get into the budget preview for 2021. The first item is the Quality Capital Purpose Undertaking Fund refinancing that we've been talking about with Tobin. As you remember from the last meeting, Tobin came and gave a presentation as to what savings the district can incur by doing a refinance of our QC Puff bonds. During this time period, I've been working with Tobin back and forth. The interest rates have dropped even a little bit more, so that's in our favor. But we're really in a unique position in our Quality Capital Purpose Undertaking Fund where we have about $1,050,000 of equity sitting in that account ready to make that bullet payment in 2031, excuse me. Right now, we pay about $315,000 a year toward principal and interest payments. We have about $1,050,000 in there, as I said before, in the QC Puff account. We have to make sure that we have the balance amount to pay off that loan in the year 2031. However, we have an adequate amount to apply between $50,000 to what I would say could be $200,000 of equity when we refinance the loan and reduce that payment payoff from 2031 to 2030, and then the subsequent year before that would be reduced as well to about $193,000. So, depending on what amount of equity we would determine to apply to that, we can shorten the length of that bond by a year and make that last payment a little less and take advantage of a lower refinance rate and create ourselves a little bit more of a savings. And the reason I'm sharing, I had Tobin run 3 scenarios for you that I think are in front of you. They look like this, and I had him run the 3 scenarios, but I also want you to be aware that we have to maintain enough equity in that account. You might ask, if we have $1,050,000 in there, why wouldn't we pay down more than $200,000? Well, in 2016, these QC Puff bonds are low interest. They were, at one point, they were 100% interest free. But in 2016, the federal government put federal sequestration in place on 7% of these loans. And so that they went from 100% interest free to 93% interest free. And then again in 2018, we saw that federal sequestration happen again, and it took a little bit more of the interest free off of that. In which case, tells us we don't really ever know that 100% free interest rate is always going to be there. So we have to make sure we keep enough of a balance in that Quality Capital Purpose Undertaking Fund in case that interest rate would continue to be chipped away at, and we wouldn't be making enough to tax collection to make towards the payment at the end of the lifespan of the bond. So I really like the fact that we have a cushion where we are. I do think we can apply at least $50,000 and probably more like $150,000 to $250,000 of equity payment to reduce that bond down further. And I think that's in our best interest to do, and it maintains enough of a balance in that fund to protect us if sequestration would rear up again. I don't know that it will, but after the COVID situation we've been in the last year, can't guarantee that it won't as well. So I hope that explains the idea behind the Quality Capital Purpose Undertaking Fund refinance and what I'm looking at doing. Been in contact with Tobin today about that, and he agrees it does make sense to apply that much equity. Questions? We're fortunate we have the funds there that make sense to use them and put that money to work for us. That's sit in the bank and really not do much for us at all. Good. Okay. What's that? We will vote on that for a final resolution in September. All right, the next item, is that all right with you, is very similar in nature. It's a lighting loan payoff. Those of you who have been on the board for a while will remember that when you entered into a lighting loan through Security First Bank, you initially took out a loan that was quite a chunk of money to redo lighting in the district. Similar situation, we have a lighting loan that currently we pay $77,654 in principal and interest on annually. We currently have $497,000 left to pay off on that loan. So that is a very low interest rate for us. It was a good deal when you got it, very good deal. It's a 1% interest rate. So we can't really refinance that for anything less. But again, because we have a healthy building fund and a healthy depreciation fund, we can look at reducing or paying off that loan and saving us some money over time. So here are the statistics. Our current building fund has $1,498,462 in it. Now that's okay. It's for the size of our district, we'd like to see it be $10 million, but it's there. And our depreciation fund has $1,828,161 in it. The loan costs us about $4,600 to $4,900 annually in interest. So it's amortized, so it fluctuates between $4,600 to $4,900 a year. In the event we pay off the loan versus continuing to pay the interest, we save approximately $15,000 over the length of the loan, which is due in, I think it's due in 2026. So over the 5-year span, we save about $15,000 on the loan. The real question for us that I've been toiling over in my mind is where's the break point even between spending down your capital in the building fund and the depreciation fund and being able to recoup that money in there, because it's really $15,000 of interest that we're saving. But we're also saving that $77,000 payment every year that we're making towards that loan. In analyzing the current status of our building fund and depreciation fund and our budget, which I'll get to in a minute, the capacity to pay off the lighting loan utilizing both of those funds, in this scenario we could utilize $250,000 of the building fund or $200,000 of the building fund and the remaining balance out of the depreciation fund, $247 or $297, whichever we choose. Put those two funds together to pay off the lighting loan, and we accomplish two things. One, we eliminate the payment of interest every year. So again, roughly $5,000 a year saves us about $15,000 to $20,000 over the next 5 years. The other thing that happens is we free up $77,654 of general fund expense right now that's going to pay that every year in our general fund. Now, this question still remains, what about the amount that we're taking out of the depreciation fund and the building fund that currently probably is not enough money that we'd like to have in there for the building repairs and things like that that we know we have to make, and that's where the budget comes into play. But what I'm saying to you tonight is that I think we're in a position, in a good position right now, looking at the entire financial status of the district, to pay that lighting loan off. And if we utilize our budget factors smart, and next year and the coming year, we can recoup that loss in our building fund and our depreciation fund, and we still free up that $77,000 plus gain back the $15,000 of interest. That's what the whole thing is about. To understand how we would repay that building fund and depreciation fund, I just need to get to the budget portion, which would be the next item on the agenda. So it all kind of flows together. But are there any questions about the lighting loan right now? It's a very good deal. But
So there's no prepayment penalty for that low of an interest rate?
good question, no. which was, I mean, it was a great deal when you guys did that. Kudos to you for taking advantage of it when you had the opportunity. 'Cause at that time, it was probably, I'm guessing, an $800,000 or $900,000 loan when you took it out, and you got the lighting repairs done. And now, because of how things have worked, you're in a financial situation, I think, to capitalize on it. You're kind of in a nice spot right now, so. Okay, so the next part of this, then, would flow into a budget preview for 2020-2021, which, as you know, in September, we get to the budget hearing, which I know everybody loves. It's everybody's favorite time of year. For me, it's been kind of nice to be working on this the last couple of days. But I do have it titled as preliminary, because I will be honest with you, with everything else going on in the district, it has been a little bit, I have to probably work on it as much as I would like to before we get to it. So everything you see right now, Scott, Doug's not here, but me, anybody in the audience, this is all preliminary. So it could change in the next 2 weeks. We got valuations the 15th, so last week, but there just hasn't been a lot of time to work on it. So basically, moving through it, the objectives of the budget hearing meeting that we have coming up will be to explain the goals for the proposed 2021 budget, do a quick review of the BPS historical financial background, discuss factors of budget proposal, talk about the expenditure and receipt side of the 2021 budget, talk about the proposed tax levy, and then also, as you know, last year we had to adopt the resolution for the budget hearing. Again, this year that statute took place, so we'll be doing that. As I went through this year and started to think about the budget, prepare for it, look at numbers, and know some of the things that we're dealing with in the district, and then also with the COVID situation, some things started to show themselves in the budget process. So I set the goals this year of the goal of financing a budget, an educational program that supports the best interests of students attending Beatrice Public Schools will always be the main goal of the budget. Adjusting the general fund and building fund. Item number 2 is really key in this explanation. Adjusting the general fund and building fund to accommodate future building needs and paying down bond debt is exactly what we've been talking about in items 7 and 8, and now in the budget 9. That number 2 is a key factor that I'm working on as I'm preparing for this budget. Aspiring to maintain board goals for 4 months of reserve. That would allow us roughly $9.8 million. We're pretty close to that right now, which is a good thing. Prepare for implications of future tax reductions. We always have to be thinking about that in the back of our heads, that at some point the legislature could reduce how we collect property value, which will have an obvious impact on all of us. And then recognition of the continued tax burden on property owners. So those 2 items really haven't changed. Okay. A little bit of enrollment history. This graph you've seen before. We just continue to update it and put it up there in front of you because it's important to remember. In our district, we have about roughly somewhere between 2,000 to 2,200 students. We're always probably going to have that many. Ironically, this year, and I'll have more information for you at the budget hearing, we actually have more homeschool students than we have this year, but our enrollment number is pretty close to where it was a year ago. The homeschool students are an obvious result of the pandemic we're in, but we also had a nice increase of students that came into the district. So we're about the same as we normally are. The Tax Equity Educational Opportunity Support Act is what dictates the law of how schools are financed and how we operate financially. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I'd love to talk about it, so if you'd like to come visit someday about it, please feel free to stop in. Okay? Our valuation history. This kind of shows you and what has happened traditionally, historically, in the district with valuation. You can see the point to this graph is that it starts low and goes up. The next graph, when we talk about state aid history, you can go ahead and state aid history will be in the next presentation. When we get to state aid history, you'll see just the opposite happen. As state aid was higher when valuation was lower, and the 2 things have just done the exact opposite. State aid has decreased as valuation has gone up. So, how our valuation shakes out for this year. Our total valuation for the district is $1,247,185,274. So that's what the county assessor certifies to me as the valuation number for our district. What that means, as we look at the history of valuation, is that if you go back to 2017-18, we were at $1,221,000,000. 18-19, we saw a 0.11% increase. 19-20, we saw a little bit more of an increase. Between last year at $1,245,000,000 and this year $1,247,000,000, you can see we're up 0.14%. 0.14% is because the biodiesel plant out west of town came off the TIF rolls and is now a tax project. So that's the only thing that really kept us from either being even the same number we were last year or even a little less, was the biodiesel plant came off the TIF rolls. So, will you go back one? The graph down at the bottom, the pie chart down at the bottom, just shows you the breakout of our tax basis in the county. And again, you will hear this all at the budget hearing. But you can see that roughly 53.4% of our taxes come from the urban portion of our county. Agriculture makes up 37.8% of our tax basis, centrally assessed is 4%, and personal property is 4.9%. So that's the breakdown. Okay? That takes us to the expenditure side. How does that translate into the amount of money we can spend and the amount of money we can receive? So the two sides of the budget. The expenditure side on the LC2, which the LC2 is the lid computation formula that the Nebraska Department of Education uses to tell us what can be certified. The Nebraska Department of Education certified us $23,963,147 worth of expenditures. Our prior year unused authority, which is a calculation that's figured through the TIOSA formula, resulted in $467,574 of access towards prior unused authority that we have. So that brings us to $24,430,721. The total allowable budget authority, total general fund operating expenditures, including $6,377,854 of sped, brings us to $29,755,391 of NDE LC2 as certified by the Department of Education, and then we throw in our cash reserve there of $3,771,861. That brings us to $34,580,391 of expenditures within our district. Now, that's the amount we could spend if we needed to. But we know that it will take us approximately $24 million in expenditures to get through next year, give or take, assuming we don't have anything crazy happen. The question is, on the revenue side, how do we balance that $34 million of expenditures? Well, we start with the beginning cash balance of $8,362,546. That does not include all of the county treasurer's balance. We don't know what that number is until August 31st. Actually, we don't know it until September 1st. So that's an estimate. Other revenues, including state and federal finances, grants, funds, approximately $19,988,306 of revenue from those two sources, state and federal funds. And then sorted out from that is our state aid, which is up just a little bit. Last year was $6,029,000. This year it's $6,229,000. So we're up about $200,000, which is nice. We got a little bit of a valuation increase, and we got a little bit more state aid. The reason for the state aid increase is it's all in the adjustments and the adjustments and the allocations in the formula. So remember, the expenditure side showed us $34,580,391 of expenditures. That's where we get the revenue to pay for it, so it balances. Expenditures equal revenue. All right? Okay. Estimated, and you notice it's in flashing neon colors up there. That's my way of having fun, sorry. But it's some flashing neon colors because this is estimated, it could change in the next 2 weeks. Again, I just need a little more time to work on it before we get to the budget hearing. But this is where it shakes us out levy-wise. And you can see the comparison on the left-hand side, we have the 1920 levy. On the right-hand side, we have the 2021 levy. Now this is where the important factor comes into the last two items that we talked about. You'll notice that over here in 1920, we had a general fund levy of $1.35. So pretty close if you round up to $1.50. What I'm proposing this year is a general fund levy of 98 cents or 99 cents. So we're reducing that levy by about a nickel. Okay? Does that make me a little nervous? Yeah, but I think we can do it because of some changes that we've made in our expenditures. But what we do to offset and plan for the future building renovations that we know our district's going to need at some time, we start a plan and process. We start a plan and put it in place. We take that nickel that was in our general fund and was not in our building fund last year, and we put it into our building fund for the coming year. So we go from basically a 1 cent levy in our building fund last year to a 6 cent levy this year. That will generate us about $777,000 into our building fund. That's the only way you can get it in there. The building fund is a taxed obligated fund, so you cannot transfer money from your general fund in there. You have to tax it. So this is the only way we can plan for a building renovation process in the future. We start that process, but we also have to remember that it does put a squeeze on our general fund. Of course, the bond fund, we no longer have a bond. We haven't had a bond for the last 3 years. That's been paid off for 3 years, so that's nil. That's important. The QC Puff fund that we talked about earlier stays roughly the same, goes down a little bit because we don't need to collect as much tax in there as what we normally have. It's outside of the budget, the $5 limit anyway, so it doesn't matter. So that brings our total levy last year. You can see our total levy was $1.08. Our total levy this year will be at $1.76, so almost the same. 4/100ths of it, or 4,000th of a penny of a decrease anyway. How does that impact our tax assets? In the general fund. In the general fund, when we drop our levy from $1.03 to 98 cents, you will see that our tax asking will drop from $12.8 million to $12.3 million. So roughly $550,000 less in our general fund. But because we've taken the time in the last couple of years to build that general fund up, and we know we've made some changes in our expenditures in the general fund side of things, I think we can accomplish that and start the process of building up our building fund for needed building renovation, paying off a loan, which frees up that other $77,000 that I talked about, and we've started the planning process for the building renovations that our district so desperately needs. The impact in the general fund will be that we will see a decrease a little bit in that cash reserve. But we've been talking a lot in our office about how we can continue to encourage people to be conscientious about spending, and continue to encourage people to be conscientious about the money that we spend. And if we can do that, I think we can muster this and make it work and create a plan that gets us a little further down the road towards those building projects that we know we need to do. So that's kind of where we're at, and that explains, it ties back to the lighting loan and it ties back to the QC Puff, this whole thing does, and it gives you a preview into the special, it gives you a preview into the budget hearing that we will have in September. Any questions?
I got just a general question. Is there any effect on our budget when we find out how many homeschool kids are out based on state aid difference? And when they are homeschooled, do we have any financial ties that we have to pay for?
That's part of our obligation. Is it only if they have like an IEP or a 504? I mean,
Yeah, great questions, great questions. Man, that's awesome that you're thinking that way, because there really are a couple of key factors in the state aid formula that impact us. One is the evaluations, but the other one, student enrollment is a part of that. So the one thing that really was a positive for us this year is that although our homeschool number increased, we had enough of an increase in just student enrollment that they kind of offset each other. So in the next year, as they're figuring our state aid, that student enrollment number really shouldn't impact us that much. That is a great question. And in answer to your question, Lisa, once a family decides to homeschool, then really the obligation becomes all theirs at that point. If it's a 504, excuse me, or an IEP student, then we're fully obligated to accommodate those students.
so if we're obligated, do those count in our enrollment numbers? Even though they're homeschooled?
Yep.
When you talked about valuation in the agricultural valuation, that is both ag land and any ag-related businesses, is that correct?
Correct.
So it's, do you know what it is, just the ag land?
I do not. I will get a report on that
Okay,
from the county assessor. They just haven't broken it down that far yet.
okay, because I thought when I have normally looked at it, it's not that high, so I thought it has to include the ag-related businesses
Yep.
also.
Yep, right now it will, and then usually about January, they give us another report that breaks it out
Okay,
even further. Okay, so that's what I'm planning. I wanted you to be aware of what is going on, so when you see those things happen, you know why. And again, this is an estimated situation. It could change in the next couple of weeks. I don't anticipate a lot of change, but it could change a little bit. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't know, is there anything else left on that? Questions? I think we answered those.
do you know, I just want to comment that I think that you've done a really nice job working on that budget, looking at the QC funds and, paying off the lighting fund. I think those are really good moves, real positive moves. So I have to thank you and Jackie and all the administrators who have really worked hard.
Thank you.
Can you refresh my memory? There's something, isn't there, about the building fund tied to our budget authority? I was thinking that John Brazel had always told us that, if we kept that building fund, it affected our budget authority. Yeah, I think back for some notes and what.
But I guess I'm not sure.
I remember that one of the main things that he always talked about is we couldn't use it if it was in the building fund for anything but building funds. So he encouraged us to move everything from building fund into general fund.
I was thinking that there was something tied to our budget authority. That's why I was glad I waited, because like you said, I probably was a little bit nervous taking money out of the building fund until this piece was added.
Yeah. It's I'm not gonna lie, I am concerned about taking that nickel out of the general fund for a lot of reasons. But given the year that we had last year because of the COVID pandemic, we didn't have some of the expenses that we normally would have had that could have impacted our budget a little bit differently. And knowing where we're gonna finish this year's budget cycle, I think it's a good year to do this and really give that building fund a booster shot to propel us towards that goal that we have out there. And we'll see how it works. You'll probably hear me stress out about it at some point or another, so I apologize. But I think it makes some sense right now. Good questions. Appreciate the discussion. that's kind of how we're planning to proceed, unless something rears up and slaps me in the face in the next couple of weeks. But if it does, then I'll get you the budget. That's all I have.
This is the proper time for public questions and comments on any topic, and we do have someone that would like to address the board. If you want to come forward, and there's a chair for you so you can sit down.
Turn the lights on so you're not completely in the hot seat.
If you could introduce yourself, please, it'd be helpful.
Will do. My name is Joseph Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist here in town. Address is 1201 North 11th Street. I have a sophomore and a freshman and a sixth grader in the public school system. So I guess one of the things I just wanted to bring up or address in a capacity, which is I feel like there needs to be some open dialogue about, is as the school year started, there was an opportunity for an opt-out form for masking, and then there was a change in policy which led to remaining in tier 2 in essentially a capacity which is required masking while still not being able to do online learning, which my family was in disagreement with the masking side of things anyway. And so I guess I wanted to just bring up a few quick points. I've shared some information with Dr. Nielsen, and I believe you have received some of it too, potentially tonight too. So my background is I am a research chemist, so I have spent probably since 2005, so the last 15 years, I've spent my life doing research chemistry and really looking at data sets and trying to understand trends and really understanding research, comparative and otherwise. I really wanted to discuss kind of some of the basic physics and kind of chemistry around masking, what it is, what it isn't, really what I guess influenza and coronaviruses are and what they are not, and things that are potentially effective or not effective. So some of the information I provided is regarding some of the studies regarding masking, and especially cloth masking. And really kind of one of the things I did want to touch on too was really some of the physics around as we're trying to do this, is understanding what aerosolization is, which is the creation of very fine particulate from the exhalation or coughing, as it would be in a sick person. And really what it comes down to is what is effective or ineffective with respect to the filtration of that. And when you talk about aerosolization, you're talking submicron particulate, of which most masks are actually incapable of filtering. Masks that are capable of doing so look very similar to something like this, which is what I wear at my work. And the reason so is because, much like I would say when you look at a coronavirus or an influenza virus, the reality is that once you have aerosolized particulate, it does not settle. Submicron particulate stays suspended in the air for tens of minutes, if not hours. And I think part of that reality is that when you look at filtration capacity or capabilities, synthetic fibers with intrinsic electrostatic properties can reject submicron particulate. Non-synthetic fibers, natural fibers that don't have intrinsic electrostatic properties do not do so.
Before you continue, could maybe I was unclear at the beginning, that typically we allow about 5 minutes
Okay.
or no more than 20 for any topic.
Okay.
Okay.
I will try to make sure I keep it short, and more so it's just, I will try to make sure I only touch on a few. I don't want to get into the weeds. Much of this information I have presented to them too, so they will have an opportunity to look at it, and as I wanted you guys to at least know that this conversation is being had. One of the big parts that I wanted to bring up also is within this mask, see at the bottom here is a valve. And that ported valve allows me to exhale freely. And the reason why is that on a chemistry basis, there's a property called effusion, not to be confused with diffusion, but effusion, which is the movement of gas molecules down channels, which is what mass are essentially a collection of channels in which gases can move through. Nitrogen and oxygen are ideal gases, carbon dioxide and water are not. And so what I want at least people to be aware of is there's a reason why OSHA recommends these type of masks with ported valves, because long-term wearing of masks requires you to breathe freely on the exhalation side, because it allows non-ideal gases to expel out of your mask at the same rate as ideal gases. With that being said, I think it's important that everybody at least understand that mask wearing is not a non-trivial reality, and that there are things associated with it which are good or bad. And I think part of it is, making sure that everybody understands that not all masks are created ideal, and there are masks which are effective in essentially the prevention of inhalation, and there are masks which are not. And then there's also the reality too, which is one of the most common modes for infection still to this day that scientists have come to understand is self-inoculation. So it's not necessarily the inhalation of particles, but the fact that once you have aerosolized particulate, the stuff is suspended in the air, it covers your face, your hair, your clothes, and everything on you. And as much as you may wash your hands the second you wipe your eye or touch your nose, the damage is essentially done potentially. And kind of the last point I guess I want to bring up too is one of the things is regarding efficacy of the COVID tests and regarding essentially the rates of positive versus non-positive tests. And one of the things I guess I would share is that, as someone has seen, especially within the NFL recently, there's been a lot of false positive tests. And the reason why false positive tests are happening is that when you test non-symptomatic or non-sick people, the reality is that positive tests become inherently problematic. So CDC recently changed their recommendations. This was actually on August 24th, where they recommended not testing asymptomatic people, because there is a problem that when you don't have a sick population and you have a very small portion of your population that is sick, you get false positive tests on a very high rate. So I would say, for example, within Gage County, specifically with a generalized test rate, positive-wise, that's around 3.7%. There is a very big question mark of the efficacy around the actual number of positive tests, because that rate is very low for positivity, and you would likely see a certain number of false positive tests correlated with that. But that's really kind of all I wanted to share tonight with the board, especially regarding the fact that this policy change is very recent, and I do understand that there are positive cases in our schools, and I do understand the precautions that people are trying to make. And I think, for me, what it comes down to is I'm concerned that the people that have been helping facilitate some of these decisions, I'm concerned that they're making decisions based off of liability instead of science. And as much as COVID is not a false thing, and it is very real, I think we should be concerned, with making decisions that are maybe beyond the necessary reality of what we're dealing with, but also maybe decisions that are not necessarily beneficial. One of the documents I did provide was regarding the potential for large-scale masking in populations, especially general populations, causing higher rates of self-inoculation than if they would do nothing at all. So I would leave it at that, and I guess if there is any questions, I could probably field those after the meeting too. So thank you for your time, and I will leave you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
ask a follow-up question to that, or should I do it afterwards?
That's it. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
I'm just, so, we've got a guide in place, it's not necessarily a policy, because it is fluid, because everything with coronavirus changes daily. So how often are we looking at the guide and making changes or recommendations based on the ever-changing data that's coming out? I mean, like you said, the CDC has changed a few things in recent days, and it sounds like in our area, cases are trending downward, even though we have had multiple in one of our buildings. So I'm just curious how often we're going to be looking at this guide. Is the opt-out form permanently out? Are we going to readdress that, or what are your plans for these types of things?
I appreciate the question because I do think it's important. Can you help me with your name again, sir? I'm sorry.
Joseph.
Joseph, that's what I thought. That Joseph pointed out. I think he's got some great empirical evidence and research that obviously you have a very strong passion and interest in chemistry. And that's, I can't dispute any of what you said. In answer to your question, obviously the opt-out was removed through consultation and recommendation with the healthy, which I don't know if you've spoken to the hospital board, but I would recommend that as well. Just because I'm no expert in medicine and I'm no expert in chemistry, either one. So the decisions that we've made, we've leaned very heavily on the recommendations from the medical field, who also tells us that that's science. So I don't know where that crosses with what you presented tonight, but in answer to your question, Aaron, I think it is, we're constantly analyzing the plan and asking ourselves that very question as well. As a matter of fact, we had a conversation about it today as we received the update from Public Health Solutions on the risk dial and what we are seeing regionally and in our area, and do we plan to go back to the opt-out forms being available. And our plan is to, because that resulted in a consultation with Public Health Solutions and our Beatrice Community Hospital experts and our administrative team, we plan to go back to that drawing board and have that conversation again and say, do we want to go back to the opt-out process that we started at the beginning of the year? So we are reviewing it.
Any other questions?
There's just a boatload of questions that can come out after hearing the information. I think the thing that I wonder the most is when you get into large group situations, are you better having everybody masked or are you not? If you're in a close area, what's your opinion?
I would say with the information I provided to your superintendents, the masks in large groups are largely ineffectual given the types of masks that are being worn. What's publicly available is obviously not what I have, and those types of masks, even in large groups, I think part of it is, I wish I could show you guys what submicron particulate does in the air, and especially within marginally small air currents in a room. And I think part of it is understanding that if the exhalation occurs with a sick person, the reality is that what has passed through the mask will also then, once it hits the air, as much as there might be water particles associated with it, because of their size, the water around any viral particulate essentially almost immediately evaporates. And so what comes out in the exhalation, once it's in the air and evaporation spontaneously occurs, you end up with something smaller than what you actually started with. So in large settings, the masks are by and large ineffectual, and kind of one of the discussion points within this is really what it comes down to is I'm not saying that people need to write against masking as a whole, right? And I feel like there are those who feel better with the idea of it, and I think there are masks that do help people from catching it, but those masks are not readily available. But really what it comes down to is if self-inoculation is an issue, and it's less to do with what's in the air and more ends up being what happens with you after the mask comes off, and it's almost nearly impossible. So some of the information that I didn't necessarily provide was, if you look at influenza rates in Japan and South Korea, for example, right? They're nearly identical to the US. And the biggest reason why is that though there is a potential reality that there is some level of social distancing that may prevent spread, the reality comes down to is that by and large, no population has found a way to inoculate themselves against it. Immunization rates are substantially higher in South Korea, but as a population basis, though they're 90% inoculated, they catch it at the same rate as we do in the US. One of the biggest issues, and some of the things that maybe has not been discussed, is why in Japan they essentially death rates associated with influenza and pneumonia, which is one of the highest essentially cofactors to influenza, is 4 times higher than the US, and in South Korea it's twice as high on a per capita basis. So I have my concerns with it, and though I may not be a biologist, there's enough empirical evidence just on physics and chemistry to suggest that the masking is maybe not beneficial. And the fact that masks are not going to, for example, diffuse out water and CO2 at the rate that N2 and O2 are going to be exhaled from you, those two things combined lead to a bad position as a person with respect to bacteria and an environment in which bacteria can legitimately grow. So long term, I think there is a problematic unless you're doing the proper mask makes all the difference. OSHA knows it, and there's a reason why, but ported masks are not, they obviously allow complete exhalation, they don't filter. There's a reason why though. So there's a reality, which is I want people who are concerned to make sure they have the proper PPE, but not everybody is really going to be able to obtain that type of PPE, but nor can I tell you that they're going to not self-inoculate, because that's really what it comes down to, is most people self-inoculate and self-infect in some capacity. So I wish I had anything other than it is what it is, and respiratory viruses are what they are, and I wish we could do something about it, but there is literally not enough evidence to suggest we can actually physically do anything about it. So that's the long and short, in my opinion.
Are there any other questions? I guess I have a question. I appreciate everything you're saying, but I don't get how what you're saying can be so different from what an MD is saying.
So one of the things I sent, this is actually CDC report.
But now I'm concerned about what a health professional in Beatrice, Nebraska is saying. That's what I'm interested in, because there's a lot of other things that influence this decision. But so I'd like to just know why you differ with what the health professionals recommend in Beatrice. I'm just curious.
I honestly, I can't tell you why they have the opinion they have. All I know is that the research that I've been doing, there is decades of actual review research regarding specifically like rhinovirus and influenza pandemics, respiratory viruses in general. And there is a large body of physical empirical evidence that has already been come out and done in multiple settings that suggests that there is literally nothing we can do to stop the spread, which is why US policy, since the 1960s, when we had one of our major influenza pandemics, before a series of subsequent epidemics, US policy as a whole has never changed. And because there was a lot of research done back then, and there's been a lot of research done since then, that suggests there really was nothing we can do. And it's not just research done within the US, but this is research done in Japan and also in South Korea and places that still do it, knowing that there is literally almost no evidence to suggest it's a beneficial practice. So I can only tell you the work that I've done. I don't know what they're looking at. What I know is that, for example, one of the infographics that was put out is the mask infographic that is shared across the board, right? As much as that shows something with respect to how far, let's say, somebody exhales or particulate moves away from somebody, that doesn't address the reality of how long it lingers in the air.
Okay, so this is maybe more simple for me, right?
Okay.
Okay, they always have that little infographic where they have two people with no mask and they give me a percentage. And they give me another little picture with one mask and no mask, and they give me another percentage. And they give me two masks and a percentage. Is that inaccurate?
So I would say, as the head of UNMC, on an interview specifically stated, right, we have no clinical trials or studies that have proven the efficacy of masks, only because they stated it was unethical to do so with respect to coronavirus or COVID, right? The reality is that these studies have been done on other respiratory viruses. The particle is not going to operate any differently. And the reality is that the models that they use are not, because they have not done the studies, are not based off of actual empirical data from real medical trials. And so because they are not, your model is only as good as the data you put into it. So if you don't have physical real data from actual clinical trials, your models are what they are. They're a best guess, but they're not necessarily something that you can account on going forward. So what I presented to them was some of the empirical trials that have been done on other respiratory viruses that shows that as much as we have tried, we've never been able to find a means in which to stop the spread. And as much as filtration capacity is the biggest issue, and the reality is that the vast majority of masks are incapable of filtering the particulate that is generated when this happens. And there's nothing you can do about that. It's just a limit of what science and technology can do, but then it's also a limit in the sense of your mucous membranes in your eyes are capable of collecting viral particulate. And so, which is why I brought the mask that I brought, because I wanted you guys to see, like, if a person was really trying to protect themselves, this is what they need to do in order to do so. But then the amount of care you have to present with all of this that catches viral particulate in a non-medical setting, in a non-laboratory setting, is nearly impossible to achieve, which is why they have found it's nearly impossible to do anything in a large-scale human setting outside of the lab. So,
Thanks.
Is there a certain number of cases that would dictate the masking or non-masking of our, that would be acceptable for the district? I was just looking at I love that we've added that COVID-19 dashboard. That's really nice, I think, to the website, but we have 8 active cases throughout the district. I just think it's interesting, the preschool has 0 cases, which is great, and they're not masking. They're just staff, right? Staff is masking.
probably have, I would say 25% of our kids
25 are wearing.
come in with them.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real, they're 3 and 4. And
Right.
like, I
Sure,
mean,
those have been washed.
hands are all over the face. I mean, and it's the parents' comfort bringing them in, but, yeah.
That's, yeah, that dashboard just shows the active cases that we're aware of as of today,
Right.
whatever time we updated it. Yep.
Sure.
Well, and it was a question I asked of Jackie and Jason, if our cases go down in the district and we go back to tier 2, does the opt-out form go back into effect? And, you know, I know, being the person I am, I know what I would do, but I would probably say yes, because that was the criteria that was
That's
established.
And that's the question that I have been asked by the public, is.
And the other thing, when I think about it, it was always to slow the spread, not to stop the spread, so we didn't overwhelm the healthcare system. So, you know, I think it's such a new thing that everybody's struggling with the overabundance of information. You know, one day you're supposed to wear them, and the next day you're not supposed to wear them. And so, you know, I think that what the district has done is done the best job possible with the data that we have and using the public health solutions and Beatrice Community Hospital, because none of us are experts on what's going to happen in the future. I mean, I'm probably grateful I'm retired and don't have to wear it all the time. You know, I think it's difficult, and I would like to see us be in that green zone and nobody has to wear it. I don't think it's an ideal situation for anybody.
I want to write off of that comment with one of our deals that it never seems to get mentioned here is everybody just keeps focusing on masks. And I wear a mask because it was requested of me to wear a mask. It's like Walmart. I'll wear a mask because they request it. Otherwise, I never wear a mask because I don't really know. But what I do believe in is that we have a duty to provide a service for all these kids, and that is to have a school for them to come learn in. And in order to make it so that the majority of our kids can come here, there are decisions being made to allow that. And you've got so many people that believe in masks and so many people that don't. But the easiest way to be able to get it is to require everybody to wear masks. That way they all have the opportunity to come learn. And if you decide you don't want to send your kid because you're not wanting them to wear a mask, that is your choice, and you can keep them at home. But to get the majority of people in, at this point, we've decided we're going to wear masks. So we're not making this choice, or at least I don't make any decision towards this just because I believe that the mask is going to stop all the sickness and everybody's going to be healthy. I do it because I want to provide the best opportunity for all people to be able to go. And so we keep getting hung up on masks. And again, like me, that's not why I wear it. So I don't want to speak for Jason or even the board, but I know that Jason's goal and his job is to make sure he provides an opportunity for students to come in and to learn. And so he's going to do whatever it takes. At this point, I know you're listening to everybody, and right now, different groups involved are saying, put masks on and open up the schools. So that's just the only comment, and now I'll put my mask back on.
And quite honestly, I'd like to thank Joseph for coming and speaking in terms that he thought I might actually understand.
I guess I just, with respect to, I think the situation is that, I would say as a family who necessarily was not wanting our children to wear masks. I mean, they are currently going to school and they're wearing their masks and everything. And I think part of our frustration was more so, other than pulling them completely from school, there is no other option right now. And so I don't have the opportunity to keep sending them a virtual learning side of things. And so I do, to an extent, as much as I may not agree, I was willing to do so under the capacity that if things changed, I could do the virtual learning, take care of that myself. And at this point right now, I'm really, part of it is just the reality, which is as much as this allows kids to go to school, I have a decision that I do personally have to make, which is I kind of limited my options. So it's either I pull them from school and I do Nebraska High School for the University of Nebraska High School, which is an approved curriculum at home. And then there's a chance my kids can come back next year with all their courses, or I pull them out and my 2 high schoolers are stuck with me for the next 3 to 4 years, right? And I want them to have certain opportunities, but I think part of it is, for me, it's, I want to at least do my part, make sure everybody has the information I think everybody's entitled to, and you guys are able to make the decisions you need to make, so where that way I can make the decisions I need to make accordingly. So I very much appreciate your position. I understand your guys' position on it very well. So that's more so on my end, was there was a hope, and then I feel like some of that has been dashed, and so I wanted to address it, and then whatever happens, happens at this point. And, you know, at least you guys at least have a secondary opinion about some things based off of some different realities and evidence and stuff like that, so.
Well, I will say from my standpoint, of the person, and sit and listening to you and listening to all the things that have come, thank you. Thank you for coming to the board and presenting yourself in a fashion that is not only respectable, but it's educated. And it's something that we can all agree is not an easy thing to make decisions on. And I think you agree with that. But so thank you for being a concerned parent, and a parent with kids who are obviously at least doing their part to be educated in school and being an active member in their lives. And I mean that sincerely from the bottom of my heart, because I love kids. And I want to do what's best for all of them. And unfortunately, in this situation, it doesn't seem like there's a right answer. But I do appreciate your approach. I appreciate the civility of it. I appreciate you being willing to come here and share your knowledge with me, because I've learned a lot just by listening to you. I could sit here and talk to you for another 3 hours. Only if I can talk about the budget with you.
I'll go with the budget.
But the bottom line is, thank you for not being a keyboard warrior, hiding behind Facebook and spouting off about all the things we're doing wrong, and at least coming here and trying to educate us on some things to consider as we move forward through this. So, Joseph, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And hopefully I'm not speaking out of place, but I don't want to, I know how often that happens. I don't want to overlook or misinterpret the whole point, so correct me if I'm wrong, Joe. You're not for the abolishment of all masks, and you just want the opportunity to opt out.
Yes, that's pretty much what it comes down to, yes. So,
And that's what I understood from it. That's a good point of clarification, and I will tell you in all sincerity, we had that conversation today, and it was before we even had your information. And we've had it in the last couple of weeks as to what we're going to do. And I'm just going to tell you that we're going to soak in your information. We're going to soak in the information from the healthcare professionals that guided us in some of our plans and processes getting to where we are right now, and trying to make the best decision for everybody involved. So, thank you.
I have one question. Are our kids going to be back in school at Lincoln Elementary next week?
As of right now, we see no reason why that wouldn't be the case.
Great.
But I say that as we see it right now.
Yes.
And that's the crazy thing with this, and I hope everybody understands it, is that it really is every single day we are Our dashboard says 8 people, but we know there's 34 people that are right now in the process of the testing protocol. And we're not the only school. I had a Trailblazer conference meeting today, and I won't say the school's names, but there's one school that has 40 students that are COVID positive. There's another school that has 22 that are COVID positive. So we're going to literally deal with this all year.
I'm going to ask Joseph one more question. You talk about the false positives. Are there an equal amount of false negatives?
So the way the testing works is the efficacy of the test is really based off of the symptomatic positive people. So you have less of an issue with false negatives and more of an issue with false positives if you don't. So part of it is, this is also why the CDC changed their testing protocol on the 24th and why they moved it to you should not regularly test asymptomatic people.
Okay.
Because there is an issue, which is they are starting to noticeably generate a number of false positives out there. And it was not that it's new, it's just it's noticed right now. And so I would say there is concerns that I would say even as you have positive cases in school, if they're not symptomatic, the reality is that there could be concerns that there are false positives within those numbers and legitimate concerns that there are false positives with those numbers. So unless you are doing multiple tests on an individual that had a positive test that's asymptomatic, it's going to be hard to determine that. And most kids are not going to want that done to them multiple times.
Most adults aren't.
No.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any more questions? If not, do I have a motion for adjournment?
I moved to the Board of Education of District 15 adjourned.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Excuse me. Thank you. Not that I'm in a hurry.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Missed something now.